Hello and welcome to TaleTalk English. Today's story is emotional, dramatic, and full of heartbreaking secrets, betrayal, and painful choices. It will also help you improve your English listening and vocabulary through simple conversations and real-life emotions. As you listen, try to imagine every scene, every expression, and every feeling. This is the story of a woman who discovered her husband had another wife. My name is Susan Cooper, and for many years I believed I had the perfect family. I was 34 years old and lived in the quiet town of Maple Glen, a peaceful place surrounded by green fields, small farms, and old oak trees. Everyone knew everyone. Neighbors greeted each other every morning, children played safely in the streets, and life moved slowly. I had lived there since I was a little girl. My husband, James Cooper, was one of the most respected men in town. He owned a small woodworking shop where he built furniture, repaired doors, and made beautiful wooden cabinets. People often said James could turn an ordinary piece of wood into something wonderful. He worked hard every day. He smiled often. He was always willing to help others. Everyone admired him. I admired him too. We had been married for 12 years and had two wonderful children. Our son, Jason, was 10 years old. He loved climbing trees and dreamed of becoming an engineer. Our daughter, Deborah, was 7. She spent hours drawing flowers, birds, and little houses with colorful pencils. Our home was small, but it was full of laughter. At least, that was what I believed. Every morning, James kissed me goodbye before leaving for work. "I'll be home before dinner," he always said with a warm smile. Sometimes he was, sometimes he wasn't. When he arrived late, he always had a reason. A customer needed help. I had to finish an important project. I met a supplier from another town. His explanations always sounded reasonable. I never questioned him. Trust was the strongest part of our marriage. Or so I thought. About 20 kilometers away, in the nearby town of Riverside, another woman also believed she was living a happy life. Her name was Victoria Hayes. Victoria was 32 years old and worked as a music teacher at the local elementary school. She was cheerful, intelligent, and loved helping children discover their talents. She had been married to James for almost 6 years, but she knew him from another part of his life. To her, James was a businessman who often traveled because many customers wanted his handmade furniture. She admired his dedication. She believed every word he told her. Victoria lived alone with James in a comfortable house near the river. They had no children yet, although they had often talked about starting a family. "I want our children to grow up hearing music every day," Victoria liked to say. James always smiled. "Soon," he answered, "very soon." She believed him. For years, James carefully divided his time. From Monday morning until Friday afternoon, he stayed with Susan in Maple Glen. Every Friday evening, he packed a small travel bag. "I have work in Riverside," he told Susan. She never doubted him. Meanwhile, Victoria believed James spent weekdays traveling to different villages for work before returning home every weekend. Each woman thought she understood his schedule. Neither realized they were only seeing half of his life. It was a dangerous secret, one that became harder to protect every year. James kept 2 calendars, 2 sets of family photographs, 2 wedding rings. When he stayed with Susan, he wore the simple gold ring they had exchanged years ago. Before arriving in Riverside, he quietly replaced it with another ring that Victoria had chosen together with him. He even carried 2 wallets. One contained pictures of Jason and Deborah. The other held a photograph of Victoria smiling beside a lake. Sometimes when he looked at both pictures late at night, guilt filled his heart. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself. But every Monday morning, he continued living the same lie. He convinced himself he was protecting everyone. As long as nobody discovered the truth, everything would remain peaceful. He was wrong. One Saturday afternoon, Susan was cleaning the attic. Dust covered the old wooden floor and sunlight entered through a small window. She wanted to organize several boxes that had not been opened for years. Most contained old clothes, childhood toys, and family photographs. Then she found something unusual, a small black notebook. It belonged to James. She almost put it back without opening it, but a folded paper slipped onto the floor. It was a hotel receipt. The address surprised her. Riverside. She looked at the date. It wasn't during one of James's business trips. According to his calendar, he had told her he was working late in Maple Glen that week. Susan frowned. "That's strange," she whispered. She picked up the notebook. Inside were several appointments. Most seemed ordinary. Customer names, delivery dates, wood orders. Then she noticed something else. Every weekend had only one short word written beside it. Home. She smiled. "That's sweet," she thought. But then another question entered her mind. If weekends are home, what are weekdays? She quickly closed the notebook. Maybe she was imagining things. Everyone made mistakes when writing notes. There had to be a simple explanation. She placed the notebook back inside the box. Still, the question remained in her mind. That same weekend, Victoria experienced something unusual as well. She was preparing dinner when James received a phone call. His phone was charging in the kitchen. "I'll answer it," Victoria called happily. Before James could stop her, she looked at the screen. The caller ID simply said, J. Brooks. She answered. "Hello?" A young voice replied. "Dad, are you coming to my soccer game next Wednesday?" Victoria froze. "Dad?" The boy continued. "You promised." Victoria couldn't speak. After several seconds, the call ended. James slowly entered the kitchen. "Who was it?" he asked quietly. Victoria stared at him. "A little boy." James's face lost its color. "He called you Dad?" Silence filled the room. Then James forced a weak smile. "Oh, that. My friend asked me to help his son. Sometimes the boy calls me Dad as a joke." Victoria wanted to believe him. She truly did. But something inside her changed that evening. For the first time since their marriage, doubt entered her heart. During the following weeks, both women noticed small details they had ignored before. Susan found receipts from places James had never mentioned. Victoria noticed that James became nervous whenever she asked about his weekdays. Jason once asked his father, "Dad, why can't we ever visit your work in Riverside?" James immediately changed the subject. Deborah noticed it too. "Daddy," she asked one evening, "why do you always leave on Fridays?" James smiled gently. "Because that's when grown-ups work the hardest." The children accepted the answer. Susan didn't. Not anymore. Late one night, James sat alone outside the house. The moon reflected across the quiet fields. Everything around him looked peaceful, but inside he felt a storm growing stronger. He knew he couldn't continue forever. Too many questions, too many lies, too many people depend on him. For the first time in years, he wondered if the truth would be less painful than the secret. Unfortunately, the truth was already moving toward him. Neither Susan nor Victoria knew it yet, but within a few days, one unexpected meeting would change all of their lives forever. The following Monday morning, Susan stood in the kitchen making breakfast for Jason and Deborah. The children laughed while eating pancakes, but her thoughts were somewhere else. She could not stop thinking about the hotel receipt, or the notebook, or the strange phone call James had quickly hidden from her the night before. For years, she had trusted every word her husband said. Now that trust feels weaker every day. After the children left for school, Susan cleaned the dishes and looked at James's calendar hanging on the wall. He had written only 2 words for Friday, Riverside meeting. She quietly copied the address from one of the old receipts into a small notebook. "I only want answers," she whispered to herself. "I'm not trying to find trouble." That same morning in Riverside, Victoria arrived early at school. Her students were preparing for the annual Spring Music Festival, one of the biggest events of the year. Parents from both Riverside and nearby towns would attend. There would be singing, dancing, and performances from every class. Victoria loved organizing the festival. It always brought the community together. Her best friend and fellow teacher, Rachel Morgan, noticed that Victoria looked worried. "You seem distracted today," Rachel said gently. "Is everything all right?" Victoria forced a smile. "I'm just tired." Rachel crossed her arms. "I've known you for 8 years. You're hiding something." Victoria hesitated before telling Rachel about the strange phone call. Rachel listened carefully. "Maybe it really was his friend's son," suggested Rachel. "Maybe," Victoria answered. "But why did James look so frightened?" Rachel had no answer. On Friday afternoon, James packed his travel bag as usual. He kissed Susan goodbye. "I'll be back Sunday evening." She smiled politely. "Drive safely." Her voice sounded calm. Inside, her heart was racing. The moment James's truck disappeared down the road, Susan picked up her handbag, she locked the front door, and drove toward Riverside. She had never visited that town before. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. She only wanted the truth. Meanwhile, James arrived at Victoria's house. She welcomed him with a warm smile, but he noticed something had changed. She hugged him, but not as tightly as before. At dinner, she asked simple questions. "How was work?" "Busy," he answered. "Who were your customers?" she asked. "A few families," he answered again. "What did you build?" she asked. "A kitchen." His answers were short, almost rehearsed. Victoria quietly watched him. She knew James better than anyone, or at least she thought she did. Something was wrong. The next afternoon, Riverside was full of people attending the Spring Music Festival. Children wore colorful clothes, parents carried flowers and cameras. Music filled the school playground. Susan had arrived in town nearly an hour earlier. She walked slowly through the festival, hoping she might discover why James visited Riverside so often. She felt almost foolish. "What am I doing here?" she asked herself. Then she saw him, James. He was standing beside a beautiful woman with dark brown hair. They were laughing together. The woman gently held his arm. Susan stopped walking. Her breathing became slow. "No." She shook her head. "No." She watched as James helped the woman carry several boxes into the school building. They looked comfortable together, natural, like a married couple. Susan followed them from a distance. Inside the building, Victoria was arranging chairs for the evening performance. She smiled when James entered. "Could you help me move the piano?" she asked. "Of course," he replied. They worked together while talking quietly. Susan stood just outside the open classroom door. Every word reached her. "Thank you for always supporting me," Victoria said softly. "I couldn't ask for a better husband." Susan felt as though the room began spinning. Her hands trembled. She leaned against the wall to keep from falling. "Husband," the word echoed in her mind. She wanted to believe she had misunderstood, but deep inside, she already knew. Before Susan could leave, Rachel noticed her standing alone. "Excuse me," Rachel said kindly. "Are you looking for someone?" Susan tried to smile. I'm looking for James Cooper." Rachel smiled immediately. "Oh, Victoria's husband." The word struck Susan harder than anything else. She looked toward the classroom again. Victoria's husband, her own husband, the same man. Rachel continued speaking. "They're such a lovely couple." Susan barely heard the rest. She thanked Rachel and slowly walked outside. She sat on a bench beneath a large maple tree. Tears rolled down her face. Everything she believed about her marriage had fallen apart in only a few minutes. Inside the school, Victoria noticed James looking through the window. "What are you staring at?" she asked. "I thought I saw someone I knew," he said. He stepped outside, but Susan had already disappeared into the crowd. That evening, Susan drove home in complete silence. She cried several times during the trip. When she finally arrived, Jason ran toward her. "Mom, Dad forgot my soccer game again." She hugged her son tightly. "I'm sorry." Jason looked confused. "Why are you crying?" Susan quickly wiped away her tears. "I'm just tired." She didn't want her children to know, not yet. The following morning, Victoria was cleaning the living room when she found James's travel bag still open. One corner of a photograph was sticking out of an inside pocket. She pulled it out. It showed James standing beside a smiling woman, a little boy, a little girl. They looked like a family. On the back, someone had written, "Our happiest summer together. Love always, Susan." Victoria's hands began shaking. The room became completely silent. She stared at the picture for several minutes. Finally, James walked downstairs. He stopped the moment he saw the photograph. Neither of them spoke. Victoria slowly looked up. "Who is Susan?" James closed his eyes. He had imagined this moment many times. He had prepared dozens of excuses, but now none of them felt possible. He whispered only one sentence. "I can explain." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "No." She shook her head slowly. "I think you've been explaining for years." For the next hour, James admitted everything. He confessed that Susan was his first wife, that Jason and Deborah were his children, that he had married Victoria 6 years earlier without telling either woman the truth. Victoria listened in complete silence. When James finished speaking, she asked only one question. "Does she know about me?" He lowered his head. "I don't think so." Victoria looked out the window. "You've destroyed 3 lives, and the saddest part," she paused, "is that both of us trusted you completely." Across town, Susan sat alone in her living room. The family photograph stood on the shelf. She stared at James's smiling face. Then she picked up her phone. After a long moment, she searched for the number written on one of the Riverside school brochures. Victoria Hayes. Her finger hovered over the call button. She took a deep breath, pressed it, and waited. The phone began to ring. Victoria stared at her phone as it rang. She almost ignored the call. She was emotionally exhausted after learning the truth about James's secret life. She had spent the last hour crying, asking questions that had no comforting answers. Finally, she answered, "Hello?" There was a long silence. Then a quiet voice spoke. "Is this Victoria Hayes?" Susan asked. "Yes," Victoria answered. "My name is Susan Cooper." Victoria closed her eyes. She already knew who Susan was. "I think," Susan continued softly, "we need to talk." Victoria took a deep breath. "I agree." The two women decided to meet the next afternoon at a small cafe halfway between Maple Glen and Riverside. It was a quiet place, surrounded by flowers and tall trees. Neither of them knew what to expect. When Susan arrived, Victoria was already sitting at a table near the window. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Neither woman was angry with the other. Instead, they saw the same pain reflected in each other's eyes. Susan sat down. "I'm sorry we had to meet like this." Victoria nodded. "So am I." A waitress brought them coffee, but neither woman touched the cups. Finally, Susan spoke. "How long have you been married to James?" "Almost 6 years," Victoria replied. Susan looked down at the table. "I've been married to him for 12 years. Victoria sighed. "So he lied to both of us from the beginning." Susan nodded slowly. "Yes." For nearly 2 hours, they shared their stories. Susan talked about raising Jason and Deborah. Victoria spoke about her dreams of starting a family. They showed each other photographs, birthday parties, family vacations, wedding pictures. Each photograph revealed another lie James had carefully hidden. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they laughed bitterly at how many excuses James had invented over the years. He always said weekends were busy because of work, Susan said. Victoria smiled sadly. He told me weekdays were filled with business trips. They both shook their heads. The truth seemed almost impossible to believe. Meanwhile, James sat alone in his workshop. The sound of hammers and saws was gone. For the first time in years, he had closed the shop without finishing a single project. His hands rested on an unfinished wooden table. He couldn't concentrate. Every corner of the workshop reminded him of promises he had broken. He remembered meeting Susan when they were both young. She had believed in him before anyone else did. Years later, he met Victoria while repairing the music room at Riverside School. He had wanted to tell her the truth many times, but each lie made the next one easier, until the lies became his everyday life. Now there was no escape. That evening, Susan returned home. Jason was doing his homework. Deborah was drawing pictures at the kitchen table. Both children smiled when they saw her. "Mom," Deborah said happily, "Dad said we might go camping next month." Susan's heart ached. She knelt beside her daughter. "I'm not sure that's going to happen." "Why?" Deborah asked. Susan gently brushed Deborah's hair away from her face. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, big mistakes." The little girl looked confused but nodded quietly. Later that night, James came home. He found Susan waiting in the living room. There was no anger in her face, only sadness. He sat across from her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Susan looked directly into his eyes. "Sorry isn't enough." "I know," he said again. "Our children trusted you." He lowered his head. "I know." She took a deep breath. "Did you ever love us?" James answered without hesitation. "Yes, I loved all of you." Susan shook her head. "No, you loved yourself. If you truly loved us, you would have respected us enough to tell the truth." Her words hurt because they were true. The following day, Victoria visited James one final time. She stood outside the workshop while he quietly opened the door. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," she replied. They walked inside. The room smelled of fresh wood and paint. Victoria looked around at the furniture James had built. "You create beautiful things." He smiled sadly. "I used to think I did." She looked at him calmly. "James, I don't hate you." He looked surprised. "I don't, but I can't stay with someone I no longer trust." He slowly nodded. "I understand. I hope one day you become the honest man you always pretended to be," she said. Those words stayed with him long after she left. Several weeks passed. Susan filed for divorce. Victoria did the same. The legal process took time, but both women supported each other through it. Their friendship surprised everyone. Instead of blaming one another, they realized they had both been victims of the same deception. Sometimes they met for coffee, sometimes the children came along. Jason and Deborah liked Victoria immediately. She taught them simple songs on the piano and encouraged Deborah to keep drawing. Life slowly became peaceful again. Not because everything was perfect, but because the lies were finally over. James sold his workshop a few months later. The memories inside the building had become too painful. He moved to a small apartment in another town and found work repairing furniture for a local company. His new life was quiet, very quiet. Every evening he thought about the choices that had brought him there. He missed his children. He missed the family dinners. He missed hearing laughter inside the house. Most of all, he missed the trust he had thrown away. He understood something that no one had been able to teach him before. A lie may solve today's problem, but tomorrow it grows into something much bigger. One sunny afternoon, nearly a year later, Susan and Victoria met again at the same little cafe. This time they were smiling. Life was still difficult, but they were stronger than before. Victoria had accepted a new position as the music director at a larger school. Susan had started a small bakery in Maple Glen. The business was growing, and the whole town loved her homemade bread and cakes. "You look happier," Victoria said. "I am," Susan replied. "What about you?" Victoria smiled. "I'm finally living without questions." They laughed softly. For the first time since meeting each other, neither of them felt trapped by the past. As the sun began to set, Susan watched Jason and Deborah playing in the nearby park. She smiled. Life had changed in ways she had never expected. Some dreams had ended, new ones had begun. She had learned that trust was one of the most valuable gifts a person could receive. Once broken, it was almost impossible to repair. But even after heartbreak, people could find the strength to begin again. Sometimes the hardest endings became the first step toward a better future, and that was the greatest lesson of all. Thank you for watching till the end, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new English story.